Alpha.
What's up, guys? I'm Richard de Gavea, and I'm a professional wildlife photographer and a Sony Alpha ambassador. And I'm really excited to be bringing this 6-part wildlife photography workshop to you and sharing it with you all. In this workshop, we're going to be covering numerous topics. And the idea of the workshop is starting at the basics, which is this first episode, where we will be talking through my basic camera setup, basic settings, like aperture and shutter speed, and then moving on to the gear that I used while photographing all of this. All of this was photographed at a beautiful reserve that I spent a lot of my time at, called Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve. And over a week while shooting this, I was allowed to go out into the reserve on my own in a vehicle and capture all of these incredible images. I was blessed with amazing sightings, from leopards fighting to hyenas feeding on carcasses to lions moving around and being chased by other lions. It was an incredible time, and there were some amazing image opportunities that I was given along the way. And I really want to share these insights with you. So once we've finished with the basics, which will be the core of this class or this workshop, we will then move on to individual situations and how I shot them, the settings I used, where I parked or placed my vehicle, the thinking behind my composition. All of these things will be discussed in detail in order to give you a better idea and hopefully help you when you're out in the bush the next time, so that you can capture incredible images. The final episode of this 6-part series will be my post-production and how I work from importing into Lightroom through filtering through my images. And I think I took about 11,000 images on this trip within a week. So there's a lot to go through, how I filter those down to the ones that I'm going to edit, and then how I edit, how I take an image and work it so that I get the most out of the image to portray the story that I wish to portray using Lightroom and maybe a little bit of Photoshop along the way. And don't forget to use my promo code WildRichard01. Yes, I'm a wild one. WildRichard01 for a discount on your next Sony purchase. It'll give you a 10% discount on your next Sony purchase. So you use that and you go to the website cashbacks.co.za. It is only applicable to South Africa, so if you're in the States, I'm sorry, or anywhere else in the world, I'm sorry, but WildRichard01, and you'll be able to get a 10% discount off your next Sony Alpha purchase. But now that we're done through the formalities, let's dive in and start talking about my basic camera setup. Right, guys, so I'm currently sitting at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve, and I'm actually sitting with a pride of lions at the moment, and they're just off in front here. If I lift this up, there's a lion straight down the road. You might be able to see it on the end there. But what is totally important with wildlife photography is step number 1, which is setup and understanding of what you're doing and when you're doing it. So what we're going to start is the idea of the basic camera setup. So what we're going to look at firstly is the menu. So when you get your camera first, before you do anything else, we need to set up your camera. So if we go into the menu and we hit menu, I'm going to go back to menu number 1. And a lot has been said about the Sony menu system. I think the biggest thing to remember when dealing with a menu system like this is, 1, the buttons are very customizable. So I'm going to show you on my camera where things are, and 2, there is also a favorites menu. So you don't need to change everything on your camera each time you go in. So you just have to consider what you need to change and when you need to change it. So from that perspective, all of the things that you change regularly. So like I format my cards every time I put a new card or a used card into my camera. Once I've downloaded it, I format it. And this allows
me to put that in my favorites menu. So I know exactly where to go. It's a quick, easy thing to do and move through. Right, so on menu number 1, file format I choose is RAW. And the reason why I choose RAW is a 14-bit file. So let's think of a JPEG and a RAW, and people always ask me, why do you shoot in RAW, why not JPEG? So JPEG is an 8-bit file, which is 2 to the power of 8, which means any color that you see behind me or around us, there will be 256 shades of it from its lightest form to its darkest form. A RAW photo is a 14-bit file, which is a 2 to the power of 14, which gives us 4,096 variants from the lightest to the darkest in any color. So it gives you a lot of room. The way I like to think about it is that when we're looking at when I'm looking to pack for a trip like this, in this case I have the ability to pack everything I want because I've got no guests. But when I have guests, I've got a certain weight limit. So I have to choose what I have to pack. I pack my stuff, I choose my shirts, I choose my undies, I choose everything. I put them in a bag, I lock it up, I lock the bag, and then when I go to the airport, I get it cellophane wrapped and it gets compressed. That's what a JPEG file is. Now, if I want to edit it and move anything, I need to tear open the wrapping, open it up, so you're destroying part of the file and you don't have as much color and space to work with. So this is a very important aspect to remember on this whole thing. So that's why I shoot in RAW, because I post-produce everything. For this, there's a compressed and an uncompressed file in the RAW to JPEG file. I just choose compressed. All the reading I've done and every test that I've done, there is very little difference. I can't tell a difference between the compressed and the uncompressed, and the compressed gives me a bit more stuff, a bit more space on my cards. JPEG quality fine. I don't shoot in JPEG, but just in case I do, it's always on the highest and the highest ratio. This is the A7R4, so it's got 42 megapixels. I like the ratio 3:2, and APS-C and the Super 35mm is my crop zoom, so I can set it up as a button on the top, so I don't put that on. Long exposure noise reduction I have off, but I have that in my favorites menu, which I'll show you here quickly. Long exposure noise reduction, and the reason why I've got it in my favorites menu is because of the fact that I do a lot of star photography, and when I'm doing star photography I need long exposure noise reduction. So when I'm shooting wildlife I have it off, when I'm not I leave it on. Color space, Adobe RGB, or you can leave it in sRGB. sRGB is fine, we'll leave it in sRGB. Drive mode. Now when I'm shooting wildlife, so I'm going to show you on the top here, you can see it's on single shot. This one, there's mid, which on the A7R3 is around 5, but I can set that, or I can go to low, which is slower 2, or high, which can go up to 10 frames a second on the A7R3. The A9 II and the A9 can get up to they can get up to 20 frames a second, which is freaking fantastic. It really is. We also have our timer, which we can change from a 2-second, 5-second, 10-second, and then we can choose how many continuous shots. If we want to do a 10-second with 3 shots, it'll take 3 shots consecutively after the 10 seconds. Here you can actually see the lines are getting up and getting moving. What a treat. Don't move anywhere because I need to finish my lesson. Right, so I'm going to leave that on high because it's my wildlife stuff. Bracket settings, I do not use bracketing because it messes with my exposure. Unless I'm specifically shooting an HDR, I might think about it, but if I'm shooting an HDR, I'm on a tripod, I'm able to actually just get on with what I need to do. Memory is different slots, so I choose slot 1. There's no real issue in that. Focus mode. For our focus modes, I will always choose continuous autofocus. I use back button focus, this little AF button on here, and the reason is because continuous autofocus means that where my block is, where I'm focusing, it will focus, and while I'm holding it down, it's constantly refocusing. On something like the A9 and the A9 II, they're refocusing 60 times in a second. All right, so really, really fast and lots of calculations going into it. So a very important thing to remember, because wildlife is always moving. You don't want to focus on its nose, and by the time you take the shot, you're getting its shoulders in focus. So this is a very important thing. By using the back button, if I have something static like a lion that's not doing anything, I can hold the button, focus, and let go, and it will hold the focus because I'm not pushing the focus button anymore. So it's the best of both worlds. I've set my priority set in AFS. AFS stands for autofocus static, or single point, but I like to think of the S as static because things aren't moving, and that's my priority needs to be on when I set it. And then when I have AFC, which means continuous, I want it on release. I want that thing as accurate as possible to the point of my release. Focus area, I can choose different things. So this one's on flexible spot, but I will jump between flexible spot, which is a specific spot and it doesn't move, where the lock on will lock onto what I'm looking at, and it will hold on to that area and stay there, which is freaking awesome because the lock on works wonderfully, and that's when the animal eye autofocus kicks in. So I leave it at that. For me, I've programmed my C4 button to be my shortcut to my focus. So it's right by my thumb. It's easy for me to get to, and I push that and I can see in my viewfinder what's going on and how I'm going to change my settings. All right, very important, face eye AF set. So if I go, I want the face eye priority in autofocus on, and then subject detection. If I'm shooting humans, which I was earlier today, I put that on, or I go down to animal and choose animal. And what that does is it gives me the ability to get autofocus. So I'm on this lion now. He's actually busy grooming and it keeps locking onto his ear, but he's not looking at me. As soon as he does, we'll get something of that. But I'll show you how that works on the eye. Track sensitivity. I was photographing a roller the other day and I wanted to lock onto him, so as he took off, it locked on and it held that focus so that it didn't jump to another thing. So I use that very periodically, but it's not something I change. Standard works really well for me. And autofocus with shutter, I've switched off because I just want autofocus with the back focus. Exposure compensation, now these are things that are already on the back of our camera. So metering mode is very important. I leave it on multi because I like to use exposure compensation, your plus minus, to be able to tell me what is going on that photo. It's just a beautiful lion staring at me here. Okay, so I leave that on multi and I use my exposure compensation as my guide. And then we jump across. None of those things. I don't play with any of the other stuff. Auto balance, I like to leave on daylight. That is the white balance is very, very important. And I don't like the computer doing what it does. So I was taking some photos this morning and I changed it to auto white balance because I was using a spotlight last night. And what ended up happening was my pictures, because of the way the camera was reading the light, everything came out a little green. Now, because I shoot in RAW, it's easy for me to go in and change those settings and change it up to something completely different. But you just have to concentrate on that. So I like shooting in daylight, the little sun. The reason is because it doesn't add or take away anything. It just reads the light for what it is. Focus magnifier is a very important thing. I use it with the AF in focus magnification and initial focus magnification, because what I can do is I can set this camera to DMF, which means direct manual focus, and if I have it in that and something is sitting still, all I have to do is try manually focusing, and what it'll do is zoom right in and it'll give me the greatest view to be able to tweak that going. Also works on manual focus, so when I click to manual focus, that will then come through. It allows me for focusing on the stars, things like that. But when I'm shooting wildlife that's moving, I'm always relying on AFC and the computers on the cameras to figure out how it's going to focus. There is a silent shooting mode here. If I'm in a hide where I need to keep more quiet and I don't want my camera to make a noise, even though it doesn't really, I mean, I'm going to shoot off a couple of shots here just for fun, and you can listen. It's not exactly loud like a big shutter in a mirrorless camera or the mirror going up and down, so it works really nicely. But if I needed to, I can switch it off and have a completely silent shutter, which is fantastic. Steady shot must be on, which is down here. Then there's the custom key. So this is a very important thing. The wheel I haven't set up, which is the back wheel here. Custom button 1 is exposure compensation. Now I know I have the wheel, but I've drilled myself on previous cameras to use a button that was always by my index finger. So I've just changed that and I roll as I need to. So when I'm in, all I have to do is push C1. I get my exposure compensation. I can darken the image, lighten the image, however which way I want to go, just by pushing one button. Very quick, I don't have to go into the menu. Custom button 2, I have the focus magnifier. So if I want to focus in, all I have to do, and we can't do it on continuous, but on a single frame, I'll be able to push that and then everything will move along from there. Next, custom button 3 is my white balance. So C3 is sitting at the back here. I use that for white balance, just in case I need to change things, tweak things. It's close, and white balance is very important in an image, even though I can change it after the fact. I want to get as much in as possible. And like I said, C4, custom button 4, I use as my idea for focus area. All right, so if I go in there, you'll see I can choose my different focus types depending on what I'm shooting. So then my ISO button, I've left the same. It's just the right arrow on the wheel, which is fantastic. I just push that and all that happens is my ISO pops up. I roll the wheel to where I want to go and my display button at the top. So that's basically my shortcuts on what I set up on the camera. Then let's go across to my favorites. So I've got my drive mode first up, so just in case I'm losing where I'm meant to go. And drive mode on the A7 is very important for me because there is no button like on the A9 which allows me to change my drive mode just up top here. This I have to go into a menu, so I've set up the A7R3 to do that in my favorites menu. I've also got the focus area just in case I forget where the spots are, and it happens because there's times when I don't touch my camera often enough and then I forget where I am at least then I'm not pushing 10 buttons to get there. I know it's in my shortcut menu. Format, because as I said, I always have that going. For this, because I do the Astro stuff and I'm putting things on tripods, I can turn my steady shot on and off depending on what's going on. So when I'm shooting stars, I'll switch it off. My long exposure noise reduction is there, white balance is there, and my silent shooting. Those are the quick cut custom settings that I've chosen for setting up the camera and getting the basics of the camera sorted. The suggestion is you go through the menu, you set everything up, make sure it's all right the way you need to set it up, and then we start thinking about when we're about to leave, what we're thinking about in terms of our shoot and what we're going to need settings wise. So let's talk settings. All right, so once we have learned about the basics of setting up our camera, we need to learn the basics, how certain functions on the camera will change the look of our photograph. And that's going to play an important role as to how we tell our story and what we're going to do. Right, so we have a group of zebra here that I've framed in the frame. I'm on aperture priority, which means that my priority is changing the aperture. The camera will then choose the shutter speed and the ISO if I had the ISO and auto. So I'm actually going to stick the ISO and auto here for the purposes of this. So we got an auto there. Fantastic. Now we got auto ISO. So now what it's going to choose, it's going to choose what it thinks is the correct ISO for this job. Now aperture is the size of the hole through which light comes in through the front of the lens. The bigger the hole, the more light. The smaller the hole, the less light. But where the thing gets interesting is you can see it says f4 there. If I roll, the number will get bigger. The bigger the number, the more in focus. The smaller the number, the less in focus, depth of field. So that's how we work in this whole thing. So I'm going to go from F4. You can see everything behind the zebra is very well blurred. So they stand out nicely from the subject. If I crank this up, you will start to see the background come into more focus, which gives us more depth to the whole thing. All right, so the limit on this lens is f22, but you can very clearly see how there's more detail in the background. And this is a very important thing to remember because of the fact that we are dealing with trying to tell a story. So if I just want to tell the story about a subject, I want a blurry background because the background is distracting, and what it does is it allows the subject to come to the fore. So I'm going to bring this back to f4. So suddenly the background is blurry. You can see the zebra stand out from the background, and it works wonders. Now we have zebra at different lengths. So if I zoomed in on this, and I'm going to stick this to DMF so that we can actually get to this, and I'm going to move my focus point over this zebra. And what you'll notice, I'm going to focus here first at f4. That's nicely focused there. We can go in here and you will see, hello DMF, you will see that he's perfectly focused. Okay, so he's now focused. If I go then to this guy and I took the photo, let's take the photo, and I push play and we zoom in, we can see that the guy that we focused on is beautifully sharp, but the guy behind him is soft. So we might now need to tweak that so that we get to a happy medium. So I'll go to F8, we'll leave the focus where it was, I'm going to shoot it again. Now what we can do is we can go in again to this guy's still perfectly sharp, but this guy now is in a much better position before, after. You can see how much more we've got more depth of field, so the zebra in the background. So depending on how many individuals and what sort of depth you want to work with, you start pushing that. If we're doing a landscape, for example, we then will want to go with a deep, a very small hole, a big aperture, or a big depth of field. Now you can see that the trees in the background are in focus. So now we're going to take this photo here. We'll look at these guys. They're all in focus. They're all in focus. And the background's in focus. If we go to the F8, you can see immediately how quickly that background drops off. So you can see the difference in the photos. It makes a huge difference in popping things off. So what we're trying to do with aperture generally is keep it wider open for wildlife, unless we have multiple individuals that we are trying to balance within the photograph. Shutter speed then, we're going to take this to shutter priority, and I'm going to drop this down to a 20th of a second. Now I'm going to wait for the zebra to start swinging their tails. There's one swinging his tail. And just wait for another one just in case. I just want that one with a butt to start swinging. Come on. Okay, there's another one. Now, if we look, I've slowed the shutter speed to 20th of a second. If we zoom in on where the tail is, you can see that the tail is swinging. What it's doing is blurring the action. Because I was shooting at a 20th of a second, f22 and 100 ISO, what has happened is it's blurring the movement. If these guys were to walk anywhere, we would blur them. So we need to keep that shutter speed up. That's why I advocate when you're starting out and you're still working on your camera to work in shutter priority S. And what you can do is then speed the shutter speed. So the rule of thumb is that your shutter speed should match the length of your lens at minimum, and if you can, go twice as much. So this is a 600mm lens. It is on a tripod, so I mean on this Gitzo gimbal. So because of this, it's going to give me a lot more stability. I'm going to wait till this guy's tail moves again. I'm going to focus on his tail, and there he goes. There's 2 shots. All right, so now if we look at this one, I'm going to zoom in on his butt. Look how perfectly sharp his tail is. Now that's at 6/40th. So it's still moving on the edges. Right on the tip of the tail, you can still see a bit of blur. On the previous image, where we had 20th of a second, you can't see the tail because it's moved so much. If we bump that up now to 1200, which is where we should be with the 600, just wait for this guy again. There's 1 shot there. Now, if we go into the shot and we zoom right in, you will see that everything is frozen. So shutter speed is all about freezing the motion. The way I like to think about shutter speed is it is the amount of time we are recording. 1/1250th of a second is a really small amount of time. So there's very little movement happening in that amount of time. So it freezes everything. It also helps us to hand hold the camera, which is a very great thing. One of the ways that we can utilize the shutter speed and slowing it down is in the blurring of animals. So in one of the skits that we're going to do in the future wildlife workshops, I actually go through a bunch of wildebeest that were running around and how I capture motion by using a slower shutter speed, which causes a motion blur. So I advocate going out, putting it in shutter priority, and if it's really dark, you start at like 2 or 300th of a second, and as soon as it gets light enough, you're shooting at 1,000th of a second. Leave your ISO on auto. You can cap it at like 6,400 ISO. It's a great place to start. If you choose to change your ISO yourself, recommendation on a sunny day to start off at about 200 or 400 ISO. Why not 100? Because I don't need to go that low. ISO is basically, if I'm sitting in the sun like this with my 2 hands and I put sunscreen on this hand and nothing on this hand and I left them in the sun, the hand with sunscreen on it is like a low ISO. It takes a lot more time and light from the sun to start changing the hand, which is the same as the sensor. Whereas a high ISO is me being absolutely pasty and then getting sunburnt very quickly. So that's how it works, is a sensor becomes more sensitive. That's why it's called ISO sensitivity, is because it's the sensor's sensitivity to light. The higher we go on ISO, the more light we get, but it lowers our dynamic range. And dynamic range is our ability to see from the lightest lights to the darkest dark. So think of a sunset. When you look at a sunset, you see these beautiful colors, incredible through top to bottom, in order to get the foreground and the background. But as soon as we take a photograph, our sky is beautiful and the ground is dark, or vice versa, our ground is beautiful and the sky is blown out and too light. So dynamic range is the camera's ability to see through those variances and for us to then be able to pull detail out of them in post-production.
Okay, so we've finished now with the basic camera setup and the understanding of aperture, shutter speed, and how ISO impacts an image and its dynamic range. Now we're going to have a look at the gear I took along with me and the different reasons and situations that I would use this gear in.
Right, so what gear did I bring with me? Gear is always a question that you're always going to be asked, and something that is a personal preference, and it has a lot to do with budget. I'm fortunate that some of the stuff is given to me by Sony to use, and that gives me a bit of leverage, but it's about finding the right combination of stuff. So let's start with the big stuff first. I have a 600 f4, an A9 II, incredible lens, amazing amazingly sharp, very cumbersome to use. Without this Gitzo gimbal that I have here, loosen that, this gimbal head here, this Gitzo, that was given to me by Manfrotto South Africa to use, it would make this a very difficult lens to work with. Hand holding it is very difficult. Weighting is good, but it's just heavy. The next big lens, and my favorite lens, is this one, which is the 400 2.8. And the 400 2.8 is just a magnificent lens because it's light, it's hand holdable, and you can do so much with it. It's very versatile. And I have a 1.4 times converter, which effectively turns this into that without the weight of that. So I love the 400 2.8. So that's my first choice lens. As we go down, we've got the 100 400, which is an incredible lens because it's light, it's very versatile in terms of its zoom range and its ability to do things, and its macro ability, getting really close up, which is supreme. And then when using the 400, I'll often carry the 70-200 with me because it gives me the versatility of the two cameras and two focal lengths, so that if something comes too close for a 400, I have this. The 600 here in the Sabi Sands is a little overkill because of the fact that you're not that far away from things, although I have the ability to park further away, which has less impact on the animals, which is a great thing. So the 70-200 2.8 is amazing. So both of these will work wonders at night when we're using the spotlights and things like that. And I have an A9 on that. And then I have a wide angle variant. So I have a 16-35 on an A7R3, and the 24-70, which is recording this right now, on an A7R3. So lots to choose from. In terms of accessories, of everything, the cheapest is this, which is a beanbag, and it is a must-have, guys. It fits over your door of your car. It sits on things, and it allows you a point to rest your camera and get the best out of your camera. Really, really work out what's happening with your camera. It's amazing. We then have the Gitzo gimbal, which I told you about earlier, and I've got a G-clamp that's attached to it. Very important for your heavier lenses. It allows you to move things around, to get a bit of mobility in something that's heavy, and be waiting in position and be able to pan smoothly. So that thing works like a bomb. And then the other thing I have is a Manfrotto tripod. This is a carbon fiber tripod. Manfrotto SA gave me another one to try out too, which has been amazing. But these things are completely important. Do not skimp on a tripod. This will fit this gimbal head on top of it, which allows me to use this off the vehicle. Great for my stars, star photographs, landscape photographs, and things like that. So you really have to pay attention to what gear you bring. And last but not least is a little guy that I have in my pocket. And this is an RX 100 Mark 7. Looks little, packs a punch, this guy. Has a little viewfinder that pops open. It has a flash, but the flash is pretty innocuous. And this thing shoots at 20 frames per second, so it actually has the same, almost the same settings as the A9, all built into a little body like this. It has a 1-inch sensor, so a crop sensor in this, and the lens is effectively 24-200 mils. So it replaces me having this. So for price point, you're looking at something that's great, that'll work, it fits in your pocket. This cannot go with me when I'm going out somewhere. This can. And I'm going to be doing a talk on Instagram about the potential of this as a second body, as the alternative to a second body. And I've loved using this. Great for landscapes, great for macro photography, great for wider angle stuff. And again, like I say, it fits straight into the pocket.
Wow. So I'm excited for you guys to take this information and plug it in and apply it through the next few episodes as we go through episode 2 through 5 of this workshop. In episode 2 of this workshop, we will be looking at different situations where I had lions, prides of lions that were moving around or sleeping. There were various situations that I was photographing them in, and what I was thinking and why I was photographing them in that way. The other highlight to the next episode is elephant. We will be looking at how I photographed certain elephant sightings, and there were a few occasions that elephant bulls were drinking at water holes, which provided great photo opportunities. And we will look at the humble impala and how to capture and create great images of impala. Now, if there are any questions that you have on this episode or any of the upcoming episodes, please don't hesitate to leave a question below or to send me a direct message on either Facebook or on Instagram, and I'll be happy to take them up with you and chat this through. Don't forget your 10% discount off your next Sony Alpha purchase with the promo code WildRichard01. This can be claimed back on cashbacks.co.za and will entitle you to a 10% cashback off of any of your purchases, barring a few items, but all the terms and conditions are on the website. So go check it out, and I really look forward to seeing you in episode 2, where we will be discussing further and getting right in and applying some of the knowledge. But for now, get your cameras set up, start practicing, and I look forward to the next episode. Have a wonderful day.